Hello, everyone. I'm Susanna DeBaca, the president of Business Publications Corporation, and I want to thank you for joining us today for our first Fearless Focus in our three-part virtual series of the year. If this is the first time that you're joining us, we're very glad that you could be here. Our topic of the representation of women in leadership could not be more timely and important. When we launched Fearless at the end of 2020, which just seems like a century ago, we knew that in addition to a weekly e-newsletter and other types of content, we really wanted to have space for a conversation and connection statewide. And our Fearless Focus virtual event series was born. The idea was to provide the opportunity for anyone around Iowa and even beyond to be able to easily join us to be a part of very important discussions about what it means to be fearless and what it means to be a woman in modern society today. Since we launched Fearless, we've seen tremendous growth in our Fearless followers, all of you, over the last several years. So we know that these conversations have been powerful and have resonated with so many of you. They certainly have resonated with me every time I'm on one of these panels. I come away with so much from either the people in the breakout sessions on the line or from the panelists themselves. From the very beginning, today's sponsor, Women Lead Change, has supported our Fearless initiative. We are huge fans of Women Lead Change. They are an organization like us dedicated to the development, advancement, and promotion of women, their organizations, and to having an impact on the economy and the future workforce. We love working with Women Lead Change as our goals are so closely aligned, and we are grateful for their longtime support. And today, I'm very, very excited to have the opportunity to introduce a leader from this organization that I admire greatly. So I'm pleased to introduce Amy Eaton, who's the Director of Marketing for Women Lead Change. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much, Susanna. And I will echo, we are equally as proud to be here and be a part of this conversation today and a part of the Business Record Fearless initiative. Like Susanna said, it aligns perfectly with the goals of Women Lead Change in providing tactical development to advance women leaders. It's really as simple as that when we look at workforce development. And we know today's conversation will highlight barriers that our panelists have seen, both personally and professionally in advancing women. But also what I want to take out of this is some opportunities as we move forward. It's really these opportunities to create change that make us all work better together, men and women, to create positive growth for women in leadership, quite frankly, at a greater rate of speed than we've seen over the last few decades, and quite frankly, over the last 3 years, over the women's recession and the recent pandemic. In the preview for today's session, Deb Turner noted that change is manifested by power. And we can't be afraid to seize that power in order to create inclusive workplaces. Our work at Women Lead Change is year-round and offers development to all levels of women in their career. Through workshops, intentional networking, conferences, and more, we are here to give women the tools to advance and to seize that power that's needed for the change we want to see in the world. To keep up to date on all WLC programming, please sign up for our newsletter at wlcglobal.org. We've got a busy fall coming up with our leadership conferences in both Des Moines and the Quad Cities. Next up in the month of May is our Advocates and Allies virtual speaker series. We've got 3 thought leaders scheduled for this series in May, including Dr. Steve Robbins, a favorite of the Women Lead Change followers, Soren Kaplan, and Sally Helgeson. Tickets are on sale now, and our next season of the Own It podcast, if you haven't had a chance to hear it, is launching next week. So we are excited. We are here to help wherever we can. As I said, the data continues to underscore the need for all of this work that Women Lead Change and Fearless is doing. And conversations like today are a giant step in making that happen. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you leave with some great advice and are able to put things into practice as soon as we log off today's call. Hope to see you at a future Women Lead Change event. Thank you so much, Business Record and Susanna.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Susanna, for getting us kicked off. And hello, everyone. I'm Emily Barsky, the editor of the Business Record, and we're so excited to have you join us for the first Fearless Focus of 2023. Our goal with Fearless is to empower Iowa women to succeed and work in life. And to do that, we believe in the power of inspiration and connection. We're focused on leadership today, which has been one of the most important topics that we've covered. In Fearless, we've highlighted many women and non-binary folks who are inspiring leaders. We've also highlighted arenas where lack of representation in leadership continues to be a challenge. Today, we're talking to some extraordinary leaders to hear about what helped them in their journeys and what barriers still need to be addressed. All of today's speakers are members of the Iowa Women's Hall of Fame, each trailblazing in their own respective paths. So to start us off in the spirit of fearlessness, we've asked each of today's speakers to spend a few minutes sharing a story of fearlessness as it relates to leadership. We'd love if you would drop your own moments in the chat as well so that we can see them, and we encourage you to use the chat throughout today's program. After we have a quick story from each of the speakers, we're going to dive into some questions. Fearless editor Emily Kestel is co-moderating with me today. Emily is the engine behind Fearless and produces our weekly e-newsletter and print features. We have a really great lineup with us here to inspire us. So let me introduce them to you now. So with us, we have Dianne Bystrom, Director Emerita of the Carrie Chapman Catt Center for Women in Politics at Iowa State University. We have Christine Hensley, who is a retired Des Moines City Council member. Mary O'Keefe, the retired Chief Marketing Officer at Principal Financial Group and owner of A&E Balm Co. Mary Swander, the Artistic Director of Swander Woman Productions and Executive Director of AgArts. And Deborah Turner, a board member of the League of Women Voters. And these are just a few of the titles that these folks hold. So we'll go into their each of their fearless moments now, and Dianne, we'll start with you.
Well, thanks a lot, Emily. My fearless story, as I reflected on it, is that throughout my professional career, which started as a newspaper reporter back in the 70s and then as a college administrator in the 1980s, 90s, and through the 21st century, what strikes me is that I have been able to be fearless in negotiating my worth through salary increases or equitable pay. And that started when I was first a newspaper reporter, when I joined a daily newspaper and found out that a male colleague who started the same day as I did was making more money than me, even though we had the same credentials. It was a pretty much all male environment, but I went to the publisher, an older gentleman who was much revered in the journalism community, and said that I deserved to make equal pay, and I was able to get that. Flash forward to the 1980s, I'm now an assistant provost at the University of Oklahoma, and I found out that the associate provost, who was in charge of the budget, told me that he was not recommending an increase for me because my husband was a law professor, and that what I was bringing to the family would be considered pin money. He actually said that. Interestingly enough, our boss was the first female provost at the University of Oklahoma. So I said, you know what, I'm going to need to talk to Joan to see what she thinks about your rationale, because I'm not sure she's going to agree with you. He immediately backed down and I got an equitable salary increase. I later moved to Iowa State University and, as Emily said, directed the Carrie Chapman Catt Center for Women in Politics for 22 years. And because of my early experiences, the Catt Center and then the Leadership Studies program, which I founded, offered workshops to young women about knowing their worth and negotiating their worth. And I think that's important.
Great, thank you, Dianne. And Christine will go next.
Well, thank you to the Business Record for all of the efforts you put forward in the Fearless series, because I really enjoy it, and pleased to be asked to be on the panel. Talking about my fearless moment goes back to when I was thinking about running for elective office. And it's one of those things that Mary Kramer and Connie Weimer saying, I think this is something that I would really like to do. But first of all, I had to convince my family that they were going to be supportive of that decision. And that took a little while, but we came to the conclusion that yes, it would be appropriate and they would be supportive. But once you make that decision, then it's really very, very scary, because now you are saying to yourself, I know I can do this and I want to do this. But once it becomes public, when you start talking about it publicly, you make the announcement, the question in your mind is, oh my gosh, you know, how will I think that I am capable of doing this job? So when you realize that you are now an open book, and you're not really sure who people are going to, how they're going to respond, it is a big decision and a scary decision. But I look back and having served 24 years on the Des Moines City Council, and I might add, only the last 2 years did I have a female colleague with me. The first 22 years on the Des Moines City Council, I was the only female. So stop and think about that in this day and age, having only one female on a city council. But it was a great experience. So I would encourage anybody thinking about it to move forward.
Thank you. And we have two Marys today. Mary O'Keefe, I'll have you go next.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me. You know, I don't consider fearless being without fear, because, you know, most decisions and most things in life, we ultimately have some trepidation about. Certainly in the last few years, I've had a lot of personal and family situations and loss, and just putting one foot in front of the other on days feels like that's my being fearless. But I thought of two things in particular in my professional career that I had to go ahead and move beyond any trepidation that I would have. One is, after being in corporate America for 25 years, I had retired and was pretty bored, to be honest, and wanted to start a small business. I wanted to go into business with my son. And so I took a chance, and I heard about a company that was for sale, that the owner had passed away. And I had 5 days to do due diligence. So I went and looked, and I decided that I could take that chance. If it didn't work, it wasn't so much that it would, you know, inhibit my lifestyle or being able to be retired. But I jumped in and bought a product called Happy Cow Udder Balm and the lip balm that goes with it, and started a company called A&E Balm Company. And it's the first time I've been a small business owner, and have learned a tremendous amount about the markets, about sales, about even just the kind of financial acumen you have to be a small business owner, as opposed to being in corporate oversight of department budgets. I think another time that maybe it was a more emotional, fearless moment was, I had worked for a long time, had been very successful, and had someone in the management team that wasn't real thrilled that I was in the position I was in, and really challenged me to step out of the role. And I knew in my heart, there's something that if I know I'm right, and I've always had the opportunity and privilege to think about it and do the right thing. And I haven't in my career ever had to make a decision that I didn't feel was right, or that I went against my own ethical or moral code. And in this case, I really felt like I was being pressured to do something that wasn't right. And I made the decision to fight it. There was the possibility that it was going to be not a happy time. I knew it would be ugly, and it could be public, but I held my ground. I knew I was right. I knew that I had documented, you know, the things that question, and stuck with it and maintained my moral, what I thought was right, and ended up with the right decision. And that took a lot, because the easier thing would have been to walk away. But I decided that was not right, and that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't fight. So there are all kinds of ways that you have to be fearless. And again, I don't think it's without fear. I think it's how do you move past that fear? Thanks.
Thank you. And Mary Swander.
Well, my fearless moment goes way, way back to childhood. And we lived in Western Iowa, in a little farm town where the biggest thing was the rodeo. And then we moved to the Quad Cities, and I got thrown into, city life. And I went clomping in there in my cowboy boots, which was not a big fashion hit. And after that, I just shut up and I wouldn't speak. And I was very, very shy to begin with, but a little overwhelmed by that school. And so both the teacher and the priest called up my mother and said she won't talk and she's not going to make it through the rest of her life if she doesn't get some help. Well, fortunately, in those days, they had a remedy for that. In these days, they would send you to get drugs, right? They would give you drugs. But in those days, they sent you to the theater. Now, I thought this was just a horrible, dreadful idea. I wanted no part of it, but there I was. And I was really a miserable actor. I mean, it was really pathetic. And all the other kids were like, take her off the stage. She's just terrible. Get rid of her. And but they wouldn't let me leave. And so we were in a show that summer, and we had this little show wagon that the side let down and went from park to park in Davenport. And I got into my first dramatic performance and fell off the stage, literally fell off the stage. And I got all banged up and everything. But here was my fearless moment. I was like, heck with this. So I climbed back on the stage and finished off the show. And turned out to be a real trooper in that theater group. And today I have my own theater troupe that I tour around. And that experience actually helped me throughout my whole life. I became a storyteller, an actor, a performer, a teacher, which is another level of performance. And I'm actually still really shy, but I learned how to navigate through the extroverted world and, look like I was enjoying it. And that there's an element of fear there all the time, but I know I learned how to confront it.
Thank you. And Deb.
Hi, everybody. So listening to these stories has been really amazing. And, it's really funny. I had to think about what it meant to be fearless, or what was a fearless moment, because I guess I never acknowledged the fact there was fear before some of the things that I went through. But so I had two quick things, and they had to do with medicine. Because as you know, the world of medicine for women has been difficult for many, many years. And in some areas it still is. So the first one is about being fearless and being unconventional. So when I was getting ready to be a second-year medical student, I had been newly married, and we had some friends who, and we really wanted to go spend a year in Colorado. And the idea was to go to spend a year and ski. Okay, so nobody takes a year off halfway through medical school. That's just kind of one of those unheard of things, particularly back in those days. So I got up the courage to go in to see the dean and say, I'd like to take a year off, but I'd like to come back. And he looked at me and says, what are you going to do for a year? And I said, well, we'd like to go to Colorado so that we can ski for a year. and turns out the dean was a real avid skier and loved Colorado. So that helped, but he decided I was in good standing. He said, okay, I'll put your name in next year's class then. And I got the opportunity to spend the year there. And the greatest thing was I spent the winter in a medical office learning and understanding how important it is to interact with people and patients in a real one-on-one reach out and touch bases. So it was a wonderful year for me and really changed my trajectory in medicine. So being fearless sometimes is being unconventional. And the last piece along with medicine is that I decided at the end of my training in OBGYN that I really wanted to be a gynecologic oncologist. I fell in love with that patient population. And at that time, everybody was telling me, no, well, you're really, you're not going to really make it. There are only 20 slots in the whole country. There are only 400 board certified gynecologic oncologists. There's never been a Black woman certified in gynecologic oncology. And actually, there were only 3 others in the whole country. And I also said I wanted to go to MD Anderson because there were 2 major places to train if you wanted your credentials in this area. So I said, no, I'm going to go for it. So I went down, I interviewed. The first question I got asked in my interview was, do you do drugs? Which I was a little bit surprised about. And I did get in. And one of the first things one of the head nurses told me was that, well, we're really great that you're here. However, we already know that you're not going to make it because you're a woman, you're Black, and you're a Yankee. Okay, I was training in the South and I'm going like, whoa, that was a challenge. The gauntlet was thrown down. I said, at that point, I could have thought, well, I'm just going to try to get along and keep my head down, or I'm going to decide to look at another place potentially for a fellowship. And I said, no, I can do this and I will do this. It was a couple of really tough, hard years, but at the end, that very same nurse came up to me and said, you were the best fellow we ever had. So it was worth taking that risk and dealing with the fear of not succeeding. So anyway.
Wow, those are all such great stories. And I want to remind everyone tuning in that if you wanted to share your own fearless story, feel free to put that in the chat, and we can all kind of have a collective fearless party together. So given that it's already 12:23, I would love to kind of hear more. We already heard a little bit about some of your experiences in being a leader in your communities and industries. But part of the reason why I wanted to gather you all here was because you all have been around long enough to have seen women's roles and responsibilities shift quite dramatically in your lifetime. So I would love to kind of hear a little bit about that. What have been some of the biggest changes you've seen in regards to women in leadership in your life? And Mary O'Keefe, I'll start with you. You were the first senior vice president at Principal.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest change that I've seen over the years since I got into leadership positions is representation. There are still places that women are few and far between. I'm currently at a board meeting, and I was at the board dinner last night, and there were 6 of us on the board, and 5 men and myself. And I told them I was going to be on this panel and asked the 5 guys I was with what they saw as a barrier to women in leadership, and they all at once answered men. And I took that as a good humored, but they were serious. And so over time, I don't think that in the era that I came up, I think that we had to be a lot better. We had to be a lot more, have a lot more expertise, have proven ourselves a lot more than some of the men that were our contemporaries. And I'm hoping that, while I think there is still a high bar, the representation has changed. I think the rules for a lot of places are that, people are seen on their merits and don't necessarily have to outperform everyone else just to get a place at the table. But it is important that we all do, represent and show our expertise and are able to move forward. And I've seen that change over time, and women's confidence change, not to the degree that I hope it gets to, but to a larger degree.
Yeah, thank you. Deborah, I'll go to you. You mentioned that you were the first Black woman to be certified by the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology in your field. And you were also the first Black woman to integrate a sorority at Iowa State. So you have been a pioneer in many aspects of your life. So what have you seen as some of the biggest changes in terms of women leaders in your life?
I think one of the biggest things I've seen is that women are beginning to look at themselves as powerful beings. You know, one of my things about, I think one of the biggest barriers to women in leadership is that we don't embrace the power that we have. And the power of women is phenomenal. You know, I'm national president of the League of Women Voters, and our vision is that women have the power to create a more perfect democracy. Okay, and that is absolutely true. But I think we step away from power, and we have to understand the difference between influence and power. We influence things every day. Every leader in this country at some point is influenced by women who are working with them, beside them, or sometimes at a different level. And we have to understand that if you influence people, that's great, but that means you don't have the position of power. So you have to say, I want the power, and look at it in this way, that accept the fact that you're the right person to lead that effort, and therefore not be afraid of power, but go out and reach that. And I hear women talking more and more about power, particularly young women. You know, it used to be power was a bad word, and we throw it around every day and you know, talking about it, but we really have to understand what it is, and women have to strive for the power, because power is not a bad thing. And one way to look at it, and I'll just finish with this, is that we should look at power as something we do, power to do things, not power to be over, or power over other people. It's rather the power of getting things done as the power of suppressing other people. And if we look at it that way, we swallow it a lot better, and we realize we need to grab power.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll just ask a quick follow-up question to that. Like, why do you think women are so reluctant to embrace their power?
I think we're reluctant because we have a love-hate relationship with the concept of power that we've been taught for long. So one, that power is bad, and to want to have power is not a good thing. I was speaking with my niece the other day. She's 35 years old, and we were talking about this. And she says she thinks sometimes that as women, you've had interactions with people in power, many times men, and the interaction has not gone well, or you have been suppressed by it or oppressed by it. And therefore, you don't want to be that kind of person in power. And so we don't embrace it because we think power is bad, and it's not. So.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Christine, I'll go to you next. You served as a member of Des Moines City Council for 24 years. So I am sure you have experiences and insight to share on how you've seen women's roles and responsibilities in being leaders change.
You know, I thoroughly enjoyed my time on the city council, and I will be the first to admit, my first term on the city council, I was overwhelmed. I mean, just trying to get your arms around it, and how do you actually navigate really through a male-dominated world. And I made some mistakes there, and I decided when I ran for my second term, you know, I had avoided people that I thought we just weren't on the same page. And I thought, you know, this is, if I'm going to be successful getting stuff done, I need to figure out how to work with everybody. So I really went out of my way to establish relationships with everybody. Even though we were on completely opposite sides of issues, I decided I was going to be much more successful if I could figure out a way to work with them. And it took a little while, but I look back at that experience and realize how much I was able to accomplish by coming to that realization. And I've seen over the years, even though I was the only female on the council for so long, I was the one that had the relationships with the press. And it was because, as some of the others have talked about, I went out of my way. There was never a meeting or any activity I was involved with that I wasn't prepared for. My goal was to be more prepared than anybody else so that I could ask the questions and make sure I had the information. Whereas there were other individuals that would come to meetings and would just be opening up the books as they sat down to the table. So that really gave me a huge advantage many times. The other thing that I found was very helpful for me was you go into a situation and many times people go into it and you've got views on both sides and they're really black and white views. And I found that if you really sat down and you listened to what other people were thinking, that there probably was something in there that you could agree with. And so, okay, how can we move to the middle? So I was all about developing consensus. And again, that what really helped me in my time on the council. And the last thing I would say that has always been a phrase that I really feel strongly about is regardless of what the issue is, I would walk in and as we were sitting down, my attitude is, I have a can-do attitude. Don't tell me why it's not going to work, or don't tell me all the reasons and the issues. Let's figure out how do we get to the end game. It may not be what I'm thinking about as we start out, but if we have discussion and dialogue, I think that we're going to come to something that is agreeable for all parties involved. So my 2 cents. One other thing I would just add, my earlier career was with public accounting. And when I was right out of school and in public accounting, the 90% of the individuals were males. And that has changed so dramatically over the last several decades. It was very seldom that a woman would ever make partner, let alone be a manager. And now I would say that probably, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it is overwhelmingly women are in the accounting world. Women are in positions of leadership. Women are making partner significantly more. And you even have women that are heads of some of the big 4 accounting firms. And when I was first started recruiting, and I remember going to all the state universities and Drake and Graham View, they just didn't allow women to recruit at that point. So it's been just a huge, huge shift, and for the better, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Dianne, I'll kind of stick with the theme of women in political office here, since I know that that's kind of been your life's work, is studying and analyzing representation of women in political office. So maybe you could kind of touch on what changes you've seen in women running for office and holding office.
Well, I can do that. And I can also bounce off some things some other people have said. So when Christine first introduced herself, she talked about how she really debated whether she was prepared for public office. And so research shows for a long point of time is that women have less political ambition than men. To put it simply, it's about 15 points behind. It actually gets bigger in college. So that's another reason why people like me in a college environment tried to actually help women get involved with politics by running things like Ready to Run Iowa, which we did at the Catt Center, still running today. So to make women feel like they deserve that seat at the table. What Deborah said, and this comes from another line of research, is what we see is that women don't like the term, men often seek office for political power, personal power, where women don't like that term. And so what we see is a shift in doing these seminars for women and to encourage them to go into politics is that we often talk about power as being change and being a change agent and making that power to change your community, because that resonates with women. And then my final thought will be that also, and I think this was also that something Christine, that just said is about working with others. There's a long line of research that women from both political parties are more consensus builders than men. I looked at the most recent research last night because, quite frankly, when I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in St. Louis, several of us who study gender and politics wondered if that's still going on. We live in a very partisan time, so is that still going on? And the research really only goes, the most recent research published in the early, like 2021, really just goes through 2014. And so you're kind of thinking, has it changed? But that does still show that women are more in terms of getting co-sponsors on their bills, both Republican and Democratic women. So the research as it stands today would say that women are more consensus builders.
Yeah. Mary Swander, I'll end with you. I don't think a lot of people know this. I certainly didn't know this, that you have actually had experience teaching in Ireland. So you have international experience to bring to the table. And then as well, as you mentioned, experience living in rural Iowa as well. So I'm curious from your perspective of what changes you've seen with women's role in society and role in leadership.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I have dual citizenship with United States and Ireland, and I've taught there for years. What comes to my mind is Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead said it took 3 generations of women to create a PhD. And that you can, fill in the blank, create a leader, create a woman of accomplishment. And so that's how she viewed her life, that her grandmother had a certain amount of accomplishment, her mother more, and then she was finally the one to be released, although in her era, I'm sure that was really, really difficult too. But so I think the family background, the support system is hugely, hugely important. And I listened to this, your comments, and I kept thinking checkbook, because the 3 generations in my family of women were the ones that owned the checkbook. And when I see rural women, they're the ones that take care of the books. And they're the ones that are, keeping the business on track because of that. A little story, when I founded my nonprofit AgArts, I went fundraising and had a little visit with a gentleman, who I thought would be a good supporter. And, I gave him my spiel and so forth. And he looked at me. Now, by this time I was 60 years old, had run 2 writing programs, was the poet laureate, had owned and bought and sold 3 houses, had owned a farm. And he looked at me and he said, "Now, do you have a checkbook?" And I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't figure out what he was driving at. I was like, of course I have a checkbook. But he was looking at me as a complete dope who couldn't handle money. And that's the thing that I think we really have to bring to the forefront, that we are the accountants. We have to assume that role. We do know how to make and handle money. And those 3 generations of women that I had in my memory, sitting at their desks, balancing the ledgers, working out all the finances for the farm, the family, all of those negotiations have really come to my aid. I actually got audited once by the IRS. It was a big deal. I made $6,000 for that year, but I got audited. And at the end of the thing, if you've ever been audited, you know how time consuming it is when they go full force on you. And at the end of the thing, the IRS agent came to see me and he said, "Well, I have to tell you, Miss Swander, that you are one heck of a bookkeeper." I was like, "All right, thank you." I owed nothing. And so assume that role. Don't be afraid of it. Own it. Take it on. And that's one of the reasons that women have changed, because they've recognized the power in the checkbook.
Yeah. Well, those are all great responses. I want to switch gears just a little bit. To preview this discussion, I had asked all of you to kind of talk a little bit about some of the barriers that you see women still facing today. And I'll ask you a couple of questions individually based on what you had put in your responses. And Mary Swander, I'll start with you. You had kind of talked about how women can often attack other women. We can be our own worst enemies sometimes. And I know earlier we had talked about how maybe men are the missing ingredient in our collective empowerment and advancement, but I think there is something to be said too about how women can put each other down. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I found that a huge barrier. And, and I want to just say, get over it and, join together, be cooperative, help each other instead of this. What we're doing is taking on the competitive aggression of the men and internalizing that and using it against each other. And so there's really a better way to do this. And I've studied utopian communities my whole life, and and most of them are patriarchal, but there's an assumption that we are going to cooperate and move this boat forward, and that's clearly what we have to deprogram ourselves and get with that idea.
Yeah. I'm curious if anyone else has any thoughts about the power of supporting other women.
Okay, I would just like to throw in real quickly there. I agree with that. Sometimes we are our worst enemy. And
Yeah.
I found it, I was talking to some young women in a group one time. I said, we have to get beyond wanting to be the it girl or the chosen girl, because if we look at it as it's a competition where only one of us is going to be chosen, and we come from that, from our social background and the things we do, and as we go through life and the different opportunities women have. So we have to get beyond wanting to be the chosen one and talk about being the chosen people. And it really makes a difference in how you approach things, and you stop that infighting. So just a thought.
Yeah.
I would,
Go ahead, Mary.
well, I was just going to add that as I was coming up in my career, all my mentors were men, men that saw something, men that were in a position to give me advice and to mentor me and to sponsor me. And I think one of the things that's really important is that as women, we reach out and sponsor and mentor women and young men too, to get a different perspective. But I think having that support system and sponsorship and mentorship is really important. And I didn't even realize sometimes when I had reached out to a young woman or a person, I've many years later had people stop me and tell me that something I said to them, some word of encouragement, something, when they were at a decision point and came and talked to me, and I really couldn't have told you any of those conversations or recounted any of them. But it's so amazing what you say can have such a big impact on people beyond when you think you're formally being a mentor. So I think being encouraging and being a mentor is really important to reach out to women coming up through the system.
Yeah.
Emily, and I would just add a couple of comments to what's already been said, but I think it's really important that as women, you don't worry about who gets credit for something being done or the success of something. If it gets done, if you're part of that process, then that's in the best interest of all. But I think too often, many times people are worried about, and it ties into what Deborah was saying, doing it together, and just don't worry about who's going to get credit for making something happen. And the other thing would be, we talk about mentors, and I find it, and I've had this, I've always encouraged it. I think it's really important that if there is a individual out there, male or female, that you really look up to, you maybe don't even know them, don't be afraid of reaching out to them and saying, could we have coffee? I'd really like to get to know you. I'd like to just visit with you and learn from you how you've approached different things. And I know I love to do that when I get a call like that from somebody. And I think people will be surprised that, the Iowa nice, and people are very supportive here and are really eager to provide some guidance and assistance, even if they don't know you. And like Mary said, it comes back, years down the road as to the impact that something like that would have on an individual.
And I just have a quick thought to add to all of that, as well as the mentoring, is that one of the things I've always found also, in addition to the mentoring, is to nominate women for awards. That's one of the things that we tried to do at the Catt Center. We started at Iowa State, Women Impacting Iowa State. We would get 70 nominations a year for 12 places on our calendar. We also have the Women at Influence Awards that your own publication supports. And we also have the Women's Hall of Fame. And so one of the things that I've done both while at Iowa State, but also in my retirement, is that I every year nominate a woman or two or three for a leadership award that's available.
I'd like to ask you all about last year in an interview, Barbara Wilson, who's the president at the University of Iowa, said that we often spend a lot of time talking about the barriers to women in leadership. And while, of course, it's necessary to talk about those things, it also can give other women who are thinking about leadership a negative view of what it might mean for them. So I'm wondering if you all might talk about what have been some of the most enjoyable experiences as a leader, and why should women want to be leaders. And Dr. Turner, let's start with you.
Well, I can say the most enjoyable thing about being in leadership has been the ability to meet various and different people in different walks of life across this country, and to listen to what they say and then to make that part of whatever I'm doing. The experience of, I'm one of those, I got to reach out and touch people. Okay. And so that many times in a leadership role, you have that opportunity to reach out and touch, and then also bring people together who you've touched. So one of my favorite things right now is bringing a small league from Utah together with a league in Connecticut or something like that, making those connections for other people. I think that is one of the biggest things about leadership that I really, truly like.
Mary O'Keefe, what about you? What is one of your favorite things about being a leader? Second, see if we're having issues.
Sorry, I see that I was having a little technical difficulty. To me, one of the most gratifying things, I guess it's making a difference, whether it's making a difference in a person's life or whether it's making a difference in our community. You know, having been at the principal, I thought we really had the opportunity in our community to create better opportunities for people to want to stay here and live here and work here, because a lot of young people were leaving the community. So I proposed the Principal River Walk, which was, you know, about a $50 million project. And at the time, the challenge to me was, why that? Why not put it into education or make a big gift to, you know, something else? And I had done a lot of research to find that we need things to do and ways to get outside, and studied other communities. So being able to make a difference, like the Principal River Walk being there, make a difference in people's lives, it's just unbelievably gratifying. And as a poor kid from the south side of Chicago with 10 brothers and sisters, if you had ever asked me if I would have had the opportunity to do some of the things I've done, travel the world for business and chair projects, I never would have thought that. But if you take opportunities and you work really hard and have some luck too, I will have to say, but those types of things can come through and you can make a huge difference in the world.
Thank you. Just to shift gears here a little bit, Dianne, I want to ask you a little bit about, because I think this particularly applies to the political arena, but sometimes I think with leadership, there can be stereotypes of what a leader looks like, and maybe sometimes women don't see themselves as that. We've talked a little bit about that as it relates to power. So how do you encourage women to see that as they are and that they can be leaders?
Well, I think we do it in a couple of ways. As I mentioned earlier, at the Carrie Chapman Catt Center, we became part of a national network of Ready to Run, which was founded by the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers University. And so we have that program every other year. We also offered it in a different format, actually, to students at Iowa State to become leaders in, for example, government and the student body. And because we've also found in research is that you see yourself as a leader at a young age, that will continue through. And so what I've been more involved in, and again, I love to be a mentor, I love to connect, these things have already been said, but one of the things I've tried to do, not only in my professional career, especially at Iowa State, but also in my retirement, is that there are a number of leadership programs available from a political side of, again, encouraging women how to get over that gender gap in feeling that you're qualified and ambitious for office. And so there's tons of research on that, on how you can do that. Another thing I'm involved in more now in my retirement, I did a little bit at Iowa State, but I've given presentations now at a couple colleges in universities in Nebraska on the imposter syndrome, and I've done kind of more of a deep dive into that. It's been around since 1978. Basically, in a nutshell, it's women feeling they're a fraud and they don't deserve their achievement. It's based on really a study that was published in 1978 of high achieving women who didn't feel like they deserved what they had earned. And so there's lots of interactive activities that you can do with getting women to overcome that. And recent studies show that about 70% of women have felt like an imposter in part of their career. So I guess I approach it through kind of a more of an educational standpoint.
Mm-hmm. I think we have maybe one more individual question we can ask before we get to final thoughts, because we're wrapping up on our time already. But Chris, I'd like to know from you, related to what Dianne was just talking about, whether it was accounting or on the city council, how did you really get the courage to show up as yourself and your own personality and not conform to how others, especially because you were serving with largely men, how did you get the courage to show up as yourself?
You know, looking back at my childhood, I'm the oldest of 8, and I grew up in a blue collar family, and I was a tomboy. And I just decided, you know, this is something that I want to do, and I'm going to figure out how to do it. And, you know, I had a tremendous amount of support from my family, which is extremely important, especially in elective office, because it really is a family affair. You know, there are people that like to say, no, you're the one running for office, but it truly is a family affair. You can't get away from that. So I think it was the fact that I had that support, the way I was raised. I had a lot of encouragement, and I just found that as you started talking to people and they were encouraging you to run, you just gained an additional level of confidence. And I think, you know, I look back at that, and it was one of the best things that I've ever done. And I am so pleased with the impact. And I know we were talking about what's enjoyable. And I think the fact that you have the opportunity to meet and get to know so many people that you wouldn't have crossed paths with, and you can see the impact of everything that you've done.
Yeah. Well, I truly cannot believe that it's 12:53 already. So to wrap up, I'm just going to have each of you talk about what's one thing that you want audience members to take away from this conversation. I know we talked about a lot of different things, but if you just had to choose one quick takeaway, what would it be? And I'll start with you, Dianne.
Well, getting back to I think it's really important for women to know their worth, to realize their worth, and to negotiate that worth. And I think change can come from not only positions of power, but also just being a change agent in your community, and to do whatever excites you in making that change.
Yeah, thank you. Mary Swander, what would your takeaway be?
To have a vision. You know, I think as women, we're taught that, you know, we can't create a different worldview or point of view or perspective, but go ahead and have your vision, and then and develop it and figure out a way to enact it. And you will enact it once you're a leader. You have that opportunity then.
Yeah, I love that. Deborah, what would your takeaway be?
My takeaway would be that everyone should think about the impact of what they want to make or do, and figure out how they are the person that should be doing that. So they're empowering themselves and others. And just one quick thing, the thing that has kind of stuck out to me here is that the other thing is looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, because this is an elephant in the room, and we didn't even get around to that today, but really looking at leaders, not just the ones who look like us, but reaching out and engaging with leaders who don't look like us, who come from different walks of life, because that's the only way we're going to really be powerful and make a difference. So
Yeah, thank you so much for mentioning that. I'm so sorry we couldn't get to that in this really short discussion. Mary O'Keefe, what would your takeaway be?
I think a couple of things. One is get out of your own way. Sometimes we worry about things and we put up our own barriers. Work as hard as you can at things that you love, and then watch out for those opportunities. Take those opportunities to make a difference, not to get a certain position, not to, have certain things, but just take an opportunity to do what you love and get really good at it and work really hard.
Yeah, thank you. And Chris, we'll round out with you. What would your final takeaway be?
A couple of thoughts in that area. Number one, I think it's really important to have balance between your personal and professional life. And I know many times women carry way more of the burden in the household. So I think it's really important that you figure out how to maintain some balance for your own personal well-being. And I would add that save time for yourself. If you have hobbies, if you don't have hobbies, look at, what can you do that really helps maybe eliminate some stress as you're dealing with everything. But balance would be my key word.
All right, well, thank you, speakers, for being here and sharing your thoughts. We really appreciate it. And we also want to again thank our fearless sponsor today, Women Lead Change. And of course, thank you to our audience for tuning in. And I know there was some great conversation and links going around in the chat. So if you enjoyed this conversation, we encourage you to join us for our next Fearless Focus, where we'll be talking about confidence. It's being held Thursday, June 22nd from noon to 1. If you've got story ideas or feedback on today's event, please reach out to us. If you're interested in supporting Work Like Fearless and other work produced by our locally owned media company, becoming a Business Record member or sponsor helps us continue to do work like this. Reach out to Chris Konetsky if you're interested in advertising and sponsorship opportunities. And finally, we want to leave you with a call to action. We want to encourage all of you to do something in the next week that helps elevate a woman in leadership, whether that's an up and coming leader or somebody that is already in leadership. And we want to thank you again for attending today, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.